We are live. We just sprung it on everybody. I wonder if people are
Right.
going to, FQD there. Right on, everybody. Sunday morning. Sunday. FQD lock and loaded. Hey, folks.
Yes.
FQD, Chris Allen. I'm here, Sigmund Bloom, footballguys.com, Sunday morning, because I want to spend Sunday mornings with you all. As I like to recount, Chris, as a kid growing up, waiting for like the NFL today, the pregame shows. It was a big deal. The pregame shows were a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And getting to have our own little pregame show, as humble as it is a lot of fun. So Chris and I are going to be getting together. Sorry we missed you last week, folks. I was getting my life back together. But football helps you get your life back together, or football makes you not care if your life's back together or not. And we're going to be joining you every Sunday morning, this time, 10 a.m. Eastern. We're going to preview the action, just share what's on our minds. And also, for those of you in the chat room, you're kind of part of the plan here. Let us know your questions, and we'll do the best we can to at least give you someone to blame when it all goes very wrong. One of the themes, Chris, on my mind this morning is teams that are staring at 0-2 that didn't expect to be staring at 0-2 right now. We start off the slate with Buffalo at Miami. Okay, we know that Miami is a tough out on defense. We'll see about their offense. Hey, they went into New England and won last week. I don't care if even without Tom Brady, when Bill Belichick's coaching New England, you go in and win in New England, you did something. Now, Damian Harris's fumble is part of that.
Yeah.
But with Josh Allen, what's on my mind here is kind of like Lamar Jackson last year. You can take the league by storm, and this is pointed at Greg Roman. This is pointed at Brian Dable in this case. But if you have to evolve. You can't show the league the same things you did last year. It's not going to work. And what's already starting to not work in the playoffs. So is this passing game greatly overrated? Or we're going to see it thud again this week? Or you might say, well, that's the Steelers defense, and the Steelers defense knows they're going to have to carry the team this year.
Yeah.
Miami's defense is good, but Allen had success against them. What's the headline here? 0-2 Buffalo coming out of Miami, or Josh Allen regains his form, or none of the above and something in between?
I would say something in between. I talked about this. I forget who I'd mentioned this to, like over the offseason, that it kind of surprised me. Not necessarily surprised me, but I always thought it was kind of confusing that we talk about offenses like the Chiefs, we talk about offenses like the Bills, and for as much hype that they get, they're round players. They just seem very fragile. And when I say fragile, like look at KC's offense, like behind Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, just a bunch of guys, right? We're not really counting on DeMarcus Robinson, Byron Pringle. I mean, even Clyde Edwards-Helaire to an extent for our fantasy goodness. And the same thing for Buffalo. It's Stephon Diggs, it's Josh Allen, and then afterwards it's just, all right, we're relying on Cole Beasley, we're relying on Emmanuel Sanders, but these are both guys that are 30 plus years old. And just unless we can really and especially with the extended season this year, are we expecting similar output as we did last year, especially for an offense that was running just pass plays at some of the highest rates in the league, asked them to continue to run routes on just an absurd rate. And now Emmanuel Sanders comes into week one with the foot injury. Do we expect that to hold up throughout the entire season? So after a somewhat disappointing week one, it's just, not to say that they have the leagues figured out their passing offense, so on and so forth. But if you have a week where the offense starts slow, if you have a week where Josh Allen gets pressure and seems to regress back to his 2019 days, then this is what you're going to have. I mean, it's entirely possible that they could wind up taking a step back, not just full on regression, but they could have one of those days where those deep shots to Stephon Diggs or that deep shot to like he took to Emmanuel Sanders during their week one game doesn't hit like it normally would. So it's just those are the types of things that can happen where an offense in 2020 that we saw play with fire on those deep shots, on those out routes, on those timing routes, where Josh Allen can seem to have that accuracy where it's just, this isn't the same guy that we watched in the beginnings of 2019 or we saw coming out of college that had some of those accuracy issues. And it's just, oh my gosh, like look at the step forward that he's made as a quarterback. Well, if those passes don't hit, these are the things that you see coming out of week one. And so while I'm not concerned for them moving forward, just because we know that the play volume is going to be there, like the passing volume is going to be there for that entire offense. We know that, Stephon Diggs is going to get his, Cole Beasley is going to wind up with, 8, 9, 10 targets on a weekly basis. I think the opportunity is going to continue to be there for Allen and the rest of that squad. It's just, will they get in sync? Like, how quickly do we need to wait for them to get in sync? And against Miami today, we don't know if how quickly that's going to actually happen. I mean, we saw them give at least Mac Jones a run for his money for the most part of that game, really stymie that passing offense. And while Mac Jones in his rookie debut, that's not something that we would expect, but still, it's just something that we need to keep an eye out on, like moving forward. I'm not saying that we need to just completely switch and just look at Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, even Matt Breida, right? But yeah, I would say that passing game is something that's just I've got my eyebrow raised, to say the least.
Yeah, they need to. You can't be predictable in the NFL. You have to force teams to honor the run. We'll see. Zach Moss, they said it was maybe health related. I still think Devin Singletary might be somebody we're collectively sleeping on. Cole Beasley always a good play against Miami's corners. Gabriel Davis less healthy than Emmanuel Sanders at this point. But as you said, this offense is going to run through Diggs. On the Miami side, Will Fuller, we wish him the best, whatever he's feeling. And the kind of gross, now but let's pivot to fantasy angle here is, Devontae Parker, Jalen Waddle, you like a little bit better now. I would guess that Parker's going to tangle with Tre'Davious White. So this could really be kind of a breakout game for Waddle. Although Tua wasn't, but the uniform headline last week, Chris, was Mac Jones outplays Tua. So isn't it interesting? Usually this happens when quarterbacks are drafted right next to each other, like Tua and Herbert, right? Yeah. Or Wentz and Goff, or their careers are tied to each other.
Yeah.
In this case, it's the Alabama connection. Yeah, Dak and Wentz, exactly. But in this case, it's Tua and Mac Jones, fueled by those questions. Maybe Mike Gesicki get something going, or Myles Gaskin. I'm getting a lot of Myles Gaskin questions, Chris, and I can't say yes on any of them, really. I'm not that excited. We are actually going to have a special guest here, if I can get my stuff together. And while we're waiting for our special guest, yeah, I know, I'm excited. This is really exciting.
See, I don't even know who it is now. I'm excited.
Right. Well, you could probably guess. If I gave you 3 guesses, you could guess it. Probably the first 2. Let's get some questions in here. One. Well, he's instant. He's instantly on the scene, always with the gangster lean. Dr. Gene Bramel.
Dr. Gene.
This is great, folks.
It's not that exciting. It's really
it's exciting for me. And every time that we get to be joined by Dr. Gene Bramel is a special and precious time. Because there's a lot more important things going on in the world. That the world needs Dr. Gene a lot more than we do, Doc. But I guess I'll start out like this. Is there anything that really changed significantly from an injury perspective? I mean, Josh Jacobs is out. Okay, we could start there. Like Josh Jacobs being ruled out a couple of days before the game. How does that affect his week 3 status? Anything, though, that has changed significantly since the last time we talked to you Thursday night?
I don't think so. I'm trying to decide how worried we need to be about Marquise Brown. There are some things I saw on his practice video on Friday that had me a little bit nervous, but there doesn't seem to be any concern from anybody locally or nationally that he's not going to be able to play tonight. So I'm a little bit suspicious of that situation, but he was able to finish overtime last week, came back to practice on Friday. They knew they had a little bit more time till Sunday night, so hopefully no issue there. But no, other than that, there's really nobody in particular that we're watching other than you guys are analyzing how DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams are going to separate a little bit, and whether or not there's anything else going on in San Francisco as far as injury related things with Brandon Ayuk and Trey Sermon and what have you. So nope, nothing in particular.
Chris, do you have anything teed up for Dr. Gene, or even that he can help give you a nudge? Because we have a few other players that we'll talk about. It's actually great that going into week 2, we don't have a ton of injury situations to sift through. The doctor is in.
Yeah, since we were just talking about Buffalo's passing game, like Dr. Gene, like have you heard or seen anything regarding Gabriel Davis that we should be concerned about? I know he carries the Q tag like coming into the week 2 game, but I mean, should we expect the full complement of snaps, him to have a reduced workload, and we can rely on like Cole Beasley and maybe Manny Sanders a bit more? What are your thoughts there?
I think he's going to be there. I think you've hit it there, though, is there's 4, maybe 5, depending on what you think about Dawson Knox and Devin Singletary being available in the passing game. So they kind of turned him a game time decision. There may be a little bit more going on with the ankle than we suspect, but I think Buffalo is a place where we commonly see folks listed questionable and then being able to play and see what their workload would usually be. So I think they'll use him. It's going to be a little bit more of a decoy. Those things are hard to judge, but I expect him to be active and play.
Gene, a couple more things before. Actually, I'm going to have you answer start-sit questions this morning. Is that okay? No. If you have any start-sit questions for us, Gene, if you have any for us, a couple more things I want to touch on real quick. Jonnu Smith, because, hey, it's the Jets, but it's also Jonnu Smith. I don't want to put you on the spot and say, is he on your injury-prone list? But do we take a little more notice when he's on the injury list? And do you feel like this injury could affect his availability or his quality of play today?
This was a weird week, not in that there are so many players injured that we don't really know what to do on Sunday morning necessarily, but there was not really any reporting on some of the maybe 5 to 10 guys that would be injured, and that includes Jonnu Smith. And we've said many times over the years here that the New England beat writers don't say anything, but they say things without saying things. If that makes much sense. I mean, if you kind of know how things go in New England, Bill Belichick doesn't talk about injuries at all. None of their coaches are available to talk to the media, and the players don't say anything in the locker room. But there's enough very good beat writers there that know what's going on that will put certain tweets out there that you can tell, okay, this guy really doesn't have much of a chance to play or not. But there's been also many times over the years where there's really nothing going on, and we feel like a player that's questionable and been limited all week in practice is likely to play, and then they don't. So Jonnu Smith is one of those players this week where there's just nothing. Added to the injury report on Thursday with a hip condition. Sometimes you'd think that would be a concern. Is it as big of an issue for a tight end? It's really hard to know. We didn't see anybody activated off the practice squad in New England that really raised your eyebrows as far as something going on there. So Smith is a player that is a veteran. The Patriots very commonly will restrict their practice participation and let him go. We saw it with Julian Edelman for years and years and years, and so many players, Gronkowski and others. So I think that's probably where we are with Jonnu Smith. But what I wrote yesterday morning was a situation where you're going to want to make sure that you at least look at the inactives list for these early games, and we'll know before your lineups have to be set whether or not he's going to go. But right now, I'm expecting him to play and should be okay.
And especially this is important to have Hunter Henry. Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to ask about, I know we're probably not relying too much on Jets pass catchers today since they're playing the Patriots, but Jamison Crowder pops up on the injury report with a groin strain, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. Coming off the COVID list, also has this injury. Should we expect anything from him today?
I think he's going to play. He was talking to the media about how excited he was to play with Zach Wilson. It was a groin situation that was bothering him towards the end of camp before he ended up on the COVID list. I think they wanted to see, as he came off the list on Wednesday and Thursday, what his conditioning looked like and how he was feeling. Back to practice on Friday, and he looks like he's going to play. Keelan Cole, on the other hand, I think is probably going up to a game time decision. Robert Saleh was very optimistic about both of them. Cole didn't have too much to say to the media, and I don't think they were really tracking him down much, figuring that he was going to be a little bit lower on the depth chart, possibly. But I think, whether he's active or not is going to depend on, can he play special teams? Are there other ways that he can contribute to the team? Because I think they have 3 or 4 guys that they can rotate in various positions and be successful.
Okay. Chris, you got anything else for Dr. Gene before we let him ride off into the sunset?
No, I think that's it. I think, you mentioned earlier, it's good that we don't have a ton of just like big injury news to worry about. So appreciate you, Dr. Gene, for stopping by.
Gene. Well, last one real quick, because Zach Manders in the chat room said, any chance Jeff Wilson is the answer for the SF backfield? First of all, yes. First of all, the answer to that is yes. But Gene, do we know anything more about when Wilson's going to play than we did a month or two ago?
I don't think so. We know it's a meniscus repair that happened in May. We know that those are 4 to 6 month recovery periods. It sounds like his rehab is progressing smoothly, but we're talking about a late October, November type return for him probably. And there's a lot of football to be played between now and then. We've seen what happens with the San Francisco backfield over the years and in week 1. And if he's there and there's some concern or some inconsistency, or the backfield situation hasn't shaped itself up by then yes, he could have a big role. But otherwise, he could be waiting in the wings as Elijah Mitchell has over the last couple of years, and he could be an important part there. But I don't think we're going to know whether or not he's ready until we get a little bit closer to the middle of the season and we hear how his return to football activity goes.
You got any questions for us, Gene?
I do not. You asked me about, do I have any start-sit questions? I don't have anything yet, simply because it was mostly Trey Sermon and Zach Moss and Gus Edwards, and everybody else is right. Third, fourth running back.
I had a team.
Whoever looks like they have a pulse.
Exactly. I have a team where my first 2 running backs were J.K. Dobbins and Trey Sermon.
Oh
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, I think I started Jarek McKinnon last week or something. Anyway, we start Dr. Gene every week, every Sunday. We have him join us is a wonderful thing. But even if he can't, or when you can't, you subscribe to Football Guys. You get the injury rounds during the week. You get them on Sunday mornings and many other things. Thank you, good doctor.
Sure. I'll take care. See you later, Chris.
What a treat. What a treat.
Always.
See,
Yeah.
Well, because they best in the business. We say best in the business. Gene's just the best. Okay, let's knock out some of this stuff for the people in the chat room. Okay, and these are always really good jumping off points. Also, thanks everybody for showing up. Bruce Jacobson asks Mark Andrews or Noah Fant in non PPR.
In non-PPR, I think I'm leaning Noah Fant like today.
Yes.
I do find it interesting that even with Teddy Bridgewater, and like Teddy Bridgewater, like we do like him as just as a streaming quarterback for this week, like playing against Jacksonville.
Yes. Yeah.
But like Fant,
Yes.
like Fant himself, seeing that target share like bump up like in week 1 now with Jerry Jeudy expected to be out, so Fant will likely get like most of those like underneath targets like for Teddy Bridgewater, and we know him not being as aggressive of a quarterback in general, but he was actually fairly aggressive like last week. I mean, Fant should be able to suck up a number of those targets. Now I know that Tim Patrick, KJ Hamler, like those guys will also be competing in that area of the field, but from a targets perspective, like I do think like Noah Fant, like he should be the guy that we go to this week, considering after last week, not that I'm like completely out on the Baltimore Ravens like offense or anything like that, but if you are looking for similar target share with the same upside, I mean, Noah Fant like offers both of those in my opinion for today.
This isn't a clear cut. Obviously, it's Fant, but I didn't have to think about it very long. And Teddy Bridgewater, unfolding before our very eyes, may well be Teddy Bridgewater putting together the best season of his career. He says he feels as good as he has since his knee injury. When he fell off last year, he said that was because he was hurt. He's still surrounded by some good pass catchers, even without Jeudy, who will be back mid-season. Defense. Look, this is a team, Pat Shermer, the offensive coordinator. They're not going to ask him to do things that he can't do. And he looked really good against the Giants in week 1. And I think you're right. Jeudy being out is going to help Fant. Now, in non-PPR, you might think that makes Andrews a better play, and it could, because Andrews certainly is more of a red zone threat and a touchdown threat than Fant if we look at their career production. But I'm also worried, Chris, I'm worried that the bottom's going to fall out. Not that the bottom, it was already near the bottom, but the Baltimore passing game could really, really struggle. I know Ronnie Stanley, I didn't get to ask Gene about Ronnie Stanley. Earlier in the week, the expectation was he's not going to play. Alejandro Villanueva was a turnstile last week. Kansas City is going to be relentless. Kansas City has Baltimore's number anyway. So this is one of those situations where Andrews was drafted ahead of Fant almost universally.
Yes.
And you might say Adam Harstad reminds us that the first 4 weeks, ADP is better at being predictive than previous production. We still have to incorporate the knowledge we have gained. And that's that Baltimore's pass offense is looking rough. Mark Andrews did very little last week, even in an overtime game against Vegas. And Noah Fant's looking good. Teddy's looking good. Okay, let's move on. Danny Romano says Drake, Hines, or Gordon PPR. Now let's stepping through these. Drake is going to get a nominal start. John Gruden, Peyton Barber, get some of the lead back work. With Naeem Hines, Hines is interesting because he's basically in close to a 50-50 committee with Jonathan Taylor, certainly against the Rams. That doesn't sound like a Jonathan Taylor game. I mean, that sounds like a game. By the way, the Colts getting Eric Fisher back today, losing right tackle Braden Smith, Quentin Nelson. He's probably going to play questionable. Getting Eric Fisher back, tough draw against the Rams. Oh, Carson Wentz, like Eric Stoner would say, can't get through an episode without mentioning Eric Stoner. Carson Wentz is not an answer. Carson Wentz is not one of the potential answers to this question. And then Melvin Gordon, and you have this somewhat frustrating situation, like Cecil coined, splitting work, splitting headache. Because Gordon came through with a 70-yard touchdown last week, but he and Javonte Williams, it's going to be a positive game script just like it was last week, but only one of the two hit, and only Gordon hit because of the 70-yard touchdown run. Right. So Drake, Hines, or Gordon for Danny Romano?
I lean Melvin Gordon, even despite having like the 50-50 like snap share like with them, because we're thinking about trying to predict game flow in order for either Drake or Hines to be like that in order to hit for us. Like with Drake, we're expecting him to not just carry the load or at least get more work than Peyton Barber. Like, and I don't know like why in 2021 we're talking about like Peyton Barber, but regardless.
Right. I love Peyton Barber. A great story. Great dude. Went pro early because his mom was homeless. But yeah.
But here in fantasy football, talking about like Peyton Barber here in 2021, I don't know what John Gruden's doing, but whatever. Dayton's finest, ladies and gentlemen. But for Drake, we're expecting game flow to dictate like some of his work in order for him to hit from a fantasy aspect. Like we're expecting like, you know, the Raiders to get behind after an emotional game, like in overtime. So and then Drake winds up getting a number of targets in order for him to be a viable fantasy asset. Hines, same deal. We're expecting them to, you know, roll into Lumen Field in Seattle. They're getting blown out by Russell Wilson and Chris Carson and the rest of those guys. And then Hines is the one that winds up getting a number of targets, even though Jonathan Taylor was actually used like quite frequently in the passing game, like last week as well. So it's just, again, we're trying to dictate game flow in order to squint and see like the high upside, like for either of those two guys. Where it's Melvin Gordon, at least he already has that role, like regardless of what that game looks like, because Denver pretty much had that game in hand. Like by the time that he ran that 70-yard touchdown. And even if he has that 50-50 split, at least we know what his workload is going to be like moving forward. Like we know at least he has the opportunity regardless of what the game situation looks like. So that's why, at least for right now, I lean Gordon, but I can understand like why if you need that punch, if you're looking at your roster and saying that, oh my goodness, you know, I'm already falling behind, or your opponent has like a number of guys that are sitting there in front of you that's just, you know, they're going to wind up scoring. Like if you're going up against Tyreek Hill this week, like so on and so forth, and you need that punch in your roster, I can see swinging for the upside, but I lean Gordon right now.
Yeah, Gordon, the speed was back, as Cecil said. His mom said, "Well, speed," and Gordon showed the speed was back on that one. I would personally go Drake, but that's some of that skewed by the neurotic Steelers fan in me that just sees Drake catching a lot of passes. I expect Derek Carr to throw a lot of passes in this one, so especially in PPR, Drake could get you 12 points, just like he did last week, 11 points just in his receiving scoring, and now you're going to have more carries with Jacobs out. This one, Chris, involves two players that really test your mettle on weighing what we knew going into the season versus what we learned in week one. Okay. Matt B asks, PPR flex, Christian Kirk or Elijah Mitchell? We could spend 10 minutes on either one of those guys.
What's
your first impulse? Because I can tell you're thinking, but come on.
First impulse is Elijah Mitchell. Christian Kirk, I saw I think I saw that one in the chat like earlier, and I was like, oh man, that's gonna be a toughie if we wind up actually answering that one. Christian Kirk, like 5 targets, just 5 targets now last week. Now I know he hit for the 2 touchdowns, but come on. I mean, are we really expecting like stuff like that in order to hit like on a weekly basis? Now I do like the fact that they moved him into the slot. Like all of his targets came from the slot like last week. So at least that does give some viability to what his workload is going to look like moving forward. But Elijah Mitchell, at least as of right now, the reports even from this morning are saying that he's the one that's supposed to be given at least a chance to hold on to that lead role in San Francisco. Trey Sermon is going to be active. Elijah Mitchell is going to be at the very least the 1A to a 1B like type situation. And if it's actually a running back 1 versus running back 2 situation, it should be like just steam engines, like, 100% moving forward with Elijah Mitchell. So right now I would say Elijah Mitchell.
And I think that this is so tough. This is a really tough one. And you know what it's forcing me to do? You know what I have to do sometimes, Chris? I have to go to my projections and I have to say, well, what am I actually telling people to do? Because it's, well, the reason is, and this is where projections can be, deficient, if you will, is that they are only one data point and they don't really reflect the full range of outcomes. But both of these guys have a wide range of outcomes as it is. And so I'm going to go with what my rankings say to do here, what my projections say to do here. But as we go through these things, I almost want to do something with start sits. I want to innovate with start sits, Chris, and really say, am I 51-49? Am I 55-45? Am I 70-30? Am I 90-10?
Oh yeah.
And then you bring up something earlier in your answer that's something very important as we reorient fantasy football. All of these contextual factors, like if you're facing a juggernaut, then you care more about upside. If you're facing one of the weaker teams in your league, then you care more about floor. Scoring is important. Lineups is important. I have Christian Kirk ahead of Elijah Mitchell, and I'll tell you why I'm don't want to say confident, but I feel some clarity here. Philadelphia's run defense stiffened up pretty well against Atlanta as the game went on last week. I'm not convinced that Jimmy Garoppolo is a good quarterback. Detroit's defense doesn't, play Marquez Valdez-Scantling this week. Speaking of Detroit's defense, if there's a question with Marquez Valdez-Scantling, especially speaking of upside, especially if you need that 60-yard touchdown, he have 2 60-yard touchdowns in that game tomorrow night. Mitchell, I still think you did good if you got him in your waiver wire. I still think that that's the kind of opportunity you want to get on the waiver wire. But Christian Kirk, when he got hot last year for 3 weeks, was one of the top 5 or 10 receivers in fantasy football, and it's Minnesota. That's the other thing, man. I think it's matchup. I think it's matchup that's really breaking the tie here for me. Is Arizona's going home playing Minnesota. Kirk's playing so well. San Francisco's going on the road playing an early game against Philadelphia. So I'm going to go with Kirk here. But these are some tough choices, and this is good stuff. Okay, let's try to get. And I know I'm chatty. We'll try to pick up the pace here as we have a lot of questions from our wonderful chat room. Thanks everyone for turning out. We love spending time with you. Spencer Naley, what's up, Spencer? Would you rank Diggs behind AJ Brown or CeeDee Lamb?
No, I don't think so. Maybe behind CeeDee Lamb for this week, like just given their matchup, like and whatnot,
right.
like how often they got to. Yeah, absolutely. But no, I don't think I can rank him behind like AJ Brown this week. I mean, after I think we had talked when we talked on Thursday, just talking about like Tennessee and the fact that how much they had stepped back, and like AJ Brown and Julio Jones not even being targeted until their like second or third drive or something like that. So I do have my concerns about that entire offense, like the drop in play action rate and all that. So I can't rank Stephon Diggs behind AJ Brown this week. Maybe CeeDee Lamb though.
Well, with Lamb, especially with Gallup, a little ding. This Chargers Cowboy, it's going to look like an old AFL game. This is going to be like 38-35. This is going to be a barnstorm game. Woe is you if you're putting together DFS lineups and not getting pieces of this game. Justin Herbert and Dak Prescott are going to sling it. Micah Parsons moving to defensive end. Keanu Neal is going to be a full-time linebacker because, Randy Gregory is out. DeMarcus Lawrence is out. Justin Herbert's going to be comfortable. And Dak is going to just be back there taking shots like a kid trying to win the giant stuffed bear at the state fair anyway. I mean, they're just going to be taking shots back and forth in this one. And now benching Diggs. Diggs is the kind of guy that like the 1 week and he did well last year against Miami. He's probably going to see some Xavier Howard, but he's the kind of guy that you bench him and he's going to have like 3 touchdowns and 150 yards. So, AJ Brown, you have to think Tennessee's going to have to pass a lot to keep up with Seattle this week. But Tennessee's offense could just be miserable again, which leads into the next question from Solo Dolo. And sometimes, so I want to make a little speech here, Chris, if that's okay. Speechify.
Of course.
I cannot stand it when I hear fantasy analysts complain about doing start-sit questions or saying, like, you're asking me to answer start-sit questions and I'm on the clock, that's free. That's you don't go up to Dr. Gene and say, hey, can you diagnose this? Look at this thing on my elbow. Actually, I pondered on the show a few times doing that. Anyway, the point here, Chris, is that when you get start-sit questions, as an analyst, it's going to sharpen you because you're going to see what people are thinking out there. And sometimes, Chris, just seeing which players are together in a start-sit question can be eye-opening for you because it shows you what the conventional wisdom is on a player, and it informs your trade advice. It informs a lot of things when you just understand what people are thinking out there. Okay. And speaking of that Tennessee offense, this is one of those questions. Solo Dolo asks, who to bench this week? Julio, Brandon Cooks, or Nyheim Hines? And I just want to point out, Julio was a 4th, 5th round pick. Cooks was an 8th round pick. Hines was like a 12th round pick. And here we are. And it's not crazy. This is like, oh, there's overreacting. No, it's not overreacting. Who to bench this week? Julio, Cooks, or Hines? PPR.
I would say that the guy to probably bench that is really tough. I mean, I wouldn't get mad at any of that. I would say, Hines. I'm gonna say Hines just because I can't believe that Tennessee's offense is going to continue to be that bad. Like Julio should get his targets. Same with Brandon Cooks. Hines is the one that's more game script dependent. I'm more of a believer than Jonathan Taylor's talent and what he can bring to that offense, like over Nyheim Hines. So like I lean Hines being the one to leave off.
It's easier for me to answer this one with confidence this way. Julio's not the answer. Don't bench Julio. Okay. Cooks and Hines don't offer something compelling enough to bench Julio because he's still Julio Jones. They're still going to have to pass a lot to keep up with Seattle. And Julio Julio came into this Tennessee team as he was supposed to be a leader. and obviously there's some problems. Now, while I
Right.
went talk about this, he's one of those all-time greats. I think he's going to have some sort of answer. I'm not saying shoehorn Julio into your lineup, but I'm
Right.
also saying don't contort to get him out of your lineup. Between Cooks and Hines, Chris, I'm going to confuse old Solo Dolo here and say I would bench Cooks. And the only reason I'm saying I would bench Cooks is this. If it wasn't for 2 50-50 balls, which aren't Cook's forte anyway.
That's true.
And the Jags playing like Keystone Cops in the secondary. Cooks, now I get it. Houston was playing from ahead. They got to lean on the running backs. And Tyrod Taylor might throw the ball 40 or 45 times because it's Denver. But it's Vic Fangio, man. And there's not going to be garbage time like there was against Houston for this Jacksonville offense. I don't think so. So I'm still in a kind of prove it to me moment with Cooks, whereas Hines I know is a good player and I know that he's going to be involved. But it's not that clear cut. Okay,
right.
Moving right along. This is fun. This is great that we get to spend time with our people.
Yeah.
And odds Bodkins, and this is another good one, man, because Antonio Brown, 8th, 9th round pick, Deontay Johnson, 5th round pick. But it's a good question, Antonio Brown or Deontay Johnson. It's not obvious, even though, again, a week ago you would have said, well, duh, it's Johnson.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of where I'm sitting at, like looking at this, because I do lean Deontay Johnson, like here in this one. He did have like the highest like target share out of any of the Pittsburgh wide receivers last week. Pittsburgh as a whole, despite like Ben Roethlisberger and his like, dead arm or whatever, like their pass rate over expectation was one of the highest like in the league. So it's just, I lean Deontay Johnson. Whereas with Antonio Brown, we at least have some inkling of that the target share like might oscillate between him, Evans, and Godwin on a week-to-week basis. Antonio Brown's not going to be catching the 45, 47-yard touchdown like he did last week. So
right.
I lean Johnson in this case.
So I'm going to break from you here and say I think he probably will catch another 45-yard touchdown because it's
in
Atlanta.
this, today, yes, especially in this matchup,
Atlanta.
it's another. Yeah.
It's Atlanta. We may well get in a groove or a rut, depending on how you look at it, Chris, where we're just going to say start everyone against Atlanta, start everyone against Atlanta, start everyone against Detroit, start everyone against Jacksonville. We'll see how Cleveland does against Houston. It might be start everyone against Houston. It might be start everyone against Tennessee after we see how Seattle looks today. Although that's mine. Really, we're not going to hold NFC West results against any teams that aren't in the NFC West, right?
Right.
Like, you can't judge teams by how they play against the NFC West.
Yes.
I'm probably going to see Antonio Brown here. It's kind of like the hot shooter, and also it's Atlanta, and Tampa Bay is not going to let up. They're not going to let up on anybody. Deontay Johnson had a tremendous. If you didn't see it, folks, and it was one of the differences in the game. He had a tremendous touchdown catch, concentration touchdown catch. Ben Roethlisberger, since you mentioned it, some Steelers fan, I'm going to go off on my neurotic Steelers fan tangent here. Y'all remember when Denver won the Super Bowl with the corpse of Peyton Manning, right? Remember that season? Yeah. Remember that? It was a game against Kansas City. They were honoring Peyton Manning for breaking, I think it was all-time NFL touchdown record, right?
Yeah, and he threw an interception in that game too.
He threw like 5 interceptions in that game.
I remember that.
That was his funeral, right? Yeah. That was one of the oddest scenarios to watch play out, where it was supposed to be this coronation and was actually his funeral, because he threw a record-breaking touchdown in a game where they stopped the game and made this big deal. And that game was the game when the wheels came off of his game. But he came back in the playoffs better than Brock Osweiler, and they won a Super Bowl because he has, at least on 3rd and 7, he's going to have the mental fortitude to handle those situations. And you're put in there saying, like, use your years and years of experience and don't turn the ball over. I think that's what Roethlisberger's directive is this year. I don't think this is going to be like last year where it's like, you're the offense. Okay. I think this is going to be a situation where it's okay if we punt. Like Herm Edwards, who said every drive that ends in a kick is a good drive, or something like that. My point is that, so I'm worried, whether it's Claypool or Juju or Deontay Johnson, that the volume we saw last year just isn't going to be there. And the defense is going to allow that. The defense, I mean, this is a Steelers team. They played last week like it was a playoff game. And what I mean by that is they squeezed everything they could out of that team, right? They got a block punt touchdown. Thank you, Miles Killebrew, Ulysses Gilbert. They got Deontay Johnson with that incredible catch. They eked out everything. You've mentioned a few times, Chris, that there was a pass to Emmanuel Sanders that might have been a long touchdown. Certainly would have been a long play. Yeah. And who was it that made the breakup? I can't even remember now. Was it James Pierre? I can't remember. Somebody got in and like slapped the ball after he already caught it and turned to run upfield. So the Steelers had to eke that thing out last week. we'll see how they do against the Raiders coming off of a big win on a short week. All right.
Yeah.
Moving right along. This one's pretty easy, but I want to make sure to touch on these players. Howard Wong asks Elijah Moore or DeAndre Swift have PPR.
Oh, I'm leaning Swift. I still lean Swift here. I do think that even with like the groin injury, although like, did we ask Dr. Gene about that? We should have asked Dr. Gene about that one. Even though I thought he went over it like fairly quickly.
He was full practice yesterday.
Yeah,
full
exactly.
Practice.
So no concerns there. So yeah, even with the opportunity share, like from a rushing standpoint, the target share that we saw happening. I mean, everything seems to be coming together for Swift to pay off his early round ADP. So yeah, I mean Swift.
I got to put this one up because it's Eric Stoner, and I'll let you take this one, even though you said it's me. Eric Stoner says, Sig, I will give you one last opportunity to talk me out of starting Marquez Valdes-Scantling this week. Chris Allen, I will give you one more opportunity to talk Eric Stoner or anyone else, world famous Eric Stoner, out of starting him this week.
Like the Eric Stoner? Like, no, I can't. I can't talk you out of like starting MVS like this week. No, he tied in terms of like market share for targets. Like he tied Devontae Adams last week. Like the reports out of camp, it sounds like they're going to be true. Like he's actually taken a step forward, and he could be like the legitimate wide receiver too for that team. So no, I'm not going to.
Yeah. Did you see Deebo Samuel last week? Did you see the Deebo Samuel?
Yeah.
That's what you want. That's what you're like. This one's going to be a good one to discuss, like confidence levels in players. Okay. Lucid Venom says pick 2 in PPR: Damian Harris, Darrell Henderson, or Jamar Chase.
Last two.
Is there anybody that's the last two? It is the last two. And I think, first of all, Jamar Chase looked magnificent last week.
Yes.
We'll see how he does against Chicago. Darrell Henderson looked great. Lots of reports that, hey, he's the guy. Sony Michel is not going to be as much of a threat as Adam Schefter and others thought. But with Damian Harris, we got to watch this, folks. Damian Harris is a shaky start this week, even though he's got a high ceiling because it's the Jets. Well, the Jets' run defense is actually, if they have a strength of their defense, it's the run defense.
Yeah.
But he had that fumble. He had a fumble at a place and time on the field that you just can't fumble. You cannot fumble driving for the game-winning score in the fourth quarter. That's the time that you can't ask Ernest Biner, right? Ernest Biner actually turned it into a pretty good life. But so Harris could score 2 touchdowns and have 100 yards. He could split work with Ramondre Stevenson. Ramondre Stevenson could actually be the lead back today for all we know.
Yeah.
So and with Henderson and Chase coming off of good week 1 performances, that one is not very difficult.
You want to talk about like Shanahan's doghouse? Like talk about Bill Belichick's doghouse.
Yeah, and he doesn't care what we think.
Yeah.
Okay, moving right along. And someone mentioned that Stephania Bell gave Gina a shout out.
Oh, yeah.
I'm stepping through these. Drake versus White. Now, we had Drake in an earlier question. He wasn't your choice. Does Drake become your answer if it's Drake versus James White in a PPR?
No, I think even there, I would probably lean Drake just because we know with White, it's just he just gets his money through the pass catching. With Drake, at least we know there's going to be some rushing attempts along with the target. So yeah, I'll take both. I'll take that all day.
Okay, Jason Bigelow, it's FFPC, which there's no tight ends in this, so it's just PPR scoring. Marquez, and this gives us a chance to talk about some players. I'm trying to touch on as many individual players as we can. Marquez Callaway, Cortland Sutton, and Chris, if we would have forecast, say in the offseason, before we had any news about Sutton this summer, that Jerry Jeudy would go down on week 1, we'd say, oh, even without Drew Lock, Cortland Sutton. And then A.J. Dillon against Detroit. Marcus Callaway, Cortland Sutton, or A.J. Dillon in a PPR.
Now, see, that one's interesting because if we're talking about like how bad, the Packers are going to run over Detroit, like can A.J. Dillon be the one to salt the game away? And I can see that like being the case, like where it's just fourth quarter, Rodgers is already pulled out, and A.J. Dillon is just like rumbling down the field for like 60 yards and a touchdown. I could honestly see that happening tomorrow night, or tonight rather. But either way, I lean towards Sutton because from a target share perspective, he should be the one that, like, even if he is the one that we consider to be like perimeter, deep targets or like 50-50 balls, like that sort of like from an archetype perspective, Sutton should still at least be like their primary passing game option. And we'll see like how the rest of the guys like filter out, like Patrick Fant, like, Hamler and all those other guys. At least I lean Sutton just because of like what we know he can be like from a talent perspective on the field. And then the other guys are just more role players as of right now. Like Marcus Callaway, like even after like all the hype throughout preseason, ran a number ran the highest routes on the team, if I'm remembering correctly, from week
Yeah.
one. But just Jameis Winston is spreading the ball around to all these other guys like Troutman, Deontay Harris, like Alvin Kamara, like so on and so forth. And then AJ Dillon, like it's game flow, more game flow dependent, at least from my perspective. So yeah, Cortland Sutton for me.
Yeah, and by the way, a couple of things coming in, folks. Ian Rappaport says that Justin Fields will see increased snaps against the Bengals. Sorry, why not this? Why this week? Can't be doing next week, right? Bengals fans in the house. Elijah Mitchell, Ian Rappaport says Elijah Mitchell to carry the load. He's also noted that Jermichael Hasty and Trey Sermon will see the field, but his strong wording points towards heavy workload. So if you were looking for a nudge, if you're on the fence and you really wanted to play Mitchell, but you needed something to nudge you, let Ian Rappaport do that. As expected, Rappaport says the Ravens are going to roll with the hot hand in their backfield against the Chiefs. I made a trade this week with Mark Weimer, former longtime football guy stat, OFBG, Mark Weimer, in one of our leagues where I dealt Lamar Jackson and Christian Kirk for Patrick Mahomes because I'm a little worried. I have Lamar Jackson all over the place. I traded Lamar Jackson and Logan Thomas for Kyler Murray before the season in a different IC. I'm a little worried about Lamar Jackson this year. Yeah. I think he could spike taking the offense on his back for a little while, but that can only last so long. Okay, speaking of, and by the way, my answer to that question, I think, Chris, your analysis was right on about Sutton, and let's not forget that he's still the closest thing they have to an alpha at this point. It is Jacksonville. Dillon could hit. I would say Callaway's the one you eliminate right off the bat. And he did get the snap. He did get the snaps and routes run, like you said, to be the foundation of fantasy production, but it just wasn't there. Winston only threw the ball 20 times. We'll see what he does against Carolina. You don't want to cut Callaway yet if it's not for someone compelling, but you don't want to play him this week. Dillon does give you that. I mean, just the boa constrictor second half, everything came so easy for San Francisco against the Detroit offense. And we will actually get to see an unveil. One of the problems with week one with the Packers, Chris, is we really didn't get to see an unveil of their running back plan. Right. Because, we did at least get to see that Marquez Valdez-Scantling indeed will be the number one deep target, not the number one target, but the number one deep target. So Dillon could hit. Sutton is the safer play here. I would just say that if you're outmatched, then I might go with Dillon and hope for the best, but Sutton is the play straight up here. Staying with Denver real quick gives us a chance to talk about another player that we weren't talking about last week, KJ Hamler. Tomahawk says KJ Hamler or Rondale Moore.
Rondale Moore. I think I lean more towards Rondale Moore. Just looking at from a big reveal standpoint, like seeing how like the Arizona Cardinals like were deploying their receivers last week, like seeing him like getting the requisite snaps and actually like contributing to that offense. I know that from a DFS perspective, like playing some of those like cheap wide receivers was like the construction like to go with like last week. And Moore was like one of those guys that actually wound up hitting, like more so than Elijah Moore. But we'll see if that ends up working out like this week. But I lean towards Rondale Moore, just given that we already talked about that game environment against Minnesota. We do think that that's going to be a game that's going to be like fairly up pace, like decent pass volume, so on and so forth. So I do lean like in the direction of Rondale Moore, just because I want to see him succeed. Like out of all like the rookie wide receivers from this class, like I want to see him like succeed. Just like that short bodied, jacked up looking guy. Like I want to see him be the one to like kind of to take the lead in that offense.
And they'll know how to use him. And he was an interesting guy because he was number 4 in snaps, but when he was on the field, they wanted to get him the ball.
Yes,
so, I won't talk anybody out playing Rondale Moore. I might go KJ Hamler again, just because I'm looking at opponents. I'm looking at Jacksonville. I'm looking at how their secondary played last week. I'm looking at Hamler dropping an easy touchdown, long touchdown from Teddy Bridgewater. We'd be talking differently about him, but they're both fun. Last guy, what the heck flex kind of plays this week. By the way, as an aside, something I'm going to be watching, Chris, and I have to give a nod to PFF. I know Nathan Janke does incredible work. Like during Sundays, you're going to get almost instant information from him. At halftime, you're going to get information from him. So we're a lot more aware of snap counts now. We're a lot more aware of routes run. We're a lot more aware of targets per route run and all these other metrics. And I think that it's influencing the conventional wisdom in fantasy more than it has in the past because we have so much more awareness of it. So there are a lot of these players like Marquez Callaway. We saw De'Ami Brown, who had more of a snap count in week 1, actually start to turn that into production in week 2. I'll just be tracking that because Rondale Moore is a guy where the snap count says, but usage per snap says, give him a shot. So we're going to start, the more we're aware of all these emerging metrics, we're going to learn as we go. And it's often a case-by-case basis, too. But I just find it very interesting because things have changed a lot in the 15 years that I've been doing this. Okay, let's turn back around. Let's get another data point on Julio Jones and one on Mike Williams, David Meyer. Julio Jones or Mike Williams in a PPR?
Ooh, that's actually a really good one because after last week, I would probably lean like Mike Williams. I mean, actually, all the off-season talk about making, Mike Williams that your primary like X receiver in that offense seemed to come true against Washington. Like his ADOT dropped down like from that normal, we're just going to take deep shots to Mike Williams, dropped to about 10, if I'm not mistaken. We saw a higher target share for him. Justin Herbert, we already know, is like an accurate like quarterback out on the boundary. So yeah, I lean Mike Williams for this week, especially considering the game that they're going to be playing today.
Exactly.
Like, I'm not going to talk anyone out of sitting. So
the Cowboys. Yeah. It's the Cowboys, folks. I think you just can't ignore the trends here. Julio strong negative, Mike Williams strong positive. Even though Williams wasn't that consistent, they stuck with him. Okay, Herm, and this is one of your guys, and if Atlanta would have been competitive, Devontae Smith could have had 10 catches for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns, but it wasn't competitive. It'll be more competitive this week against San Francisco. Herm in a 0.5 PPR, and Chris, I like getting 0.5 PPR start set questions because it's just not as easy sometimes.
Yeah,
in this case, players in the same position. Corey Davis or Devontae Smith this week?
Ooh. Actually, I still like Devonta Smith here in this case. For all of the ridicule that Jared Goff got, didn't look as, at least from a production or statistical like a perspective, didn't look as horrible in the stat sheets because there was just a ton of garbage having them trying to catch up. But they were able to produce against San Francisco's like defense, and I can see the same for Jalen Hurts like this week. Devonta Smith ran the most routes of any like wide receiver like the last week. We saw the production, we saw the connection there with Jalen Hurts. I'm not as worried about that matchup. A lot more short targets for Jalen Hurts, short throws for Jalen Hurts last week. That could work for Devonta Smith. Just put the ball in his hands and let him run, which from a rational coaching perspective, that's what you would want to do for a quarterback that we know at least that they think needs some time to develop more as a quarterback. So yeah, I get it. So Devonta Smith, I lean that way.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you here just because Corey Davis, and we know he's still clearly Zach Wilson's number one target. And he showed it last week in those 2 touchdowns, including one on an extended play. But they lost Mekhi Becton. And it's Bill Belichick. When we do fantasy analysis, when a team is facing Bill Belichick, the first thing we say is, what is this team comfortable doing? What does this team like to do? And the best we can tell so far, it's throw to Corey Davis. So even without Stephon Gilmore, I imagine Belichick's going to say, well, you're going to have to throw to somebody else today.
Yeah.
And we'll see. The whole Philadelphia offense analysis is really interesting because, again, we're looking at week 1, but we're also redefining week 1 based on what happens in week 2. How much of week 1 was Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni and this offense and this team's bouncing back? And how much of it was, well, it's just Atlanta. Everyone's going to look like that against Atlanta. Now you're facing San Francisco, who, by the way, San Francisco has their own problems. Jason Verrett out for the year. I hate it.
Oh, man. It's like snake bitten, man.
4th ACL tear, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was his 4th ACL tear or his 4th catastrophic injury because there was an Achilles in there. He's a good player. He's really good. And Emmanuel Mosley is, I think, out this week. I'm not out, like banged up. So can Philly take advantage of that? I'm going to go with Smith in this one, though, because I just think that Bill Belichick's going to take away whatever Zach Wilson is comfortable doing, or at least do everything he can to do that. Okay, we can get a couple more in here, folks. And thanks, everyone, for showing up. As always, we just want to spend time together. If there's anything we can do in this week, the first week of the Sunday morning this year, with Chris, who's so gracious to join us, I'm focusing on start sits, but we can always use start sits as a way to talk about things we want to talk about anyway. If there's anything I can do to help improve the format or help you all, please, always. This one is going to, speaking of Atlanta, this is just one for me to sigh, maybe quietly sob to myself a little bit. William C. says, Pitts or Gronk in a PPR?
Oh, man. I'd have to lean Gronk here. It's just to start all the Bucks. And Gronk looked good.
Exactly. He turned back the clock.
Yeah.
So I feel, I'm not going to start crying, actually. My voice is going to go up an octave. That's all. There was a time, Chris, that I would irrationally tell people to draft Gronk no matter what. Draft him a round or 2 before anybody else.
Yeah.
And I suppose with the O.J. Howard news that he wasn't looking right this summer, that he wasn't really going to be a factor, it was staring us all in the face. What we couldn't necessarily have anticipated was that Gronkowski would look like 6 years ago Gronkowski.
Right. Yeah.
He may well end up being right there with Waller and Kelsey when it's all said and done. But yeah, it's Gronk over Pitts this week. It's Gronk. I mean, I'm flexing Gronk. Like if Gronk was my number 2 tight end and my number 1 was like Higbee, someone I want to make sure that stays in my lineup, or TJ Hawkinson, I'm flexing Gronk this week. I mean, remember when it's the matchup. It's lots and lots of good stuff. There was such a great turnout this week. Such a wonderful volume of interesting questions. I think, Chris, we got to like 1/20th of them, but we have a gracious audience of football guys. We love what they do. Chris, do you have any start-sit questions for me? And then the chat room can also chime in.
Let's see. The one that I've been debating over for the last like couple of days, it's at the quarterback position. So I've got 2 guys right here. So it actually Kirk Cousins and Teddy Bridgewater. Those are the guys. Like in one of my leagues, like I went the late round quarterback streaming strategy. Hat tip to JJ Zacharyson. But I'm not entirely sure. Like if I should go like Kirk Cousins, given the up tempo environment they're going to be playing with, or do we take Teddy Bridgewater? Even though we know that I think Denver's going to smash. I think I've seen Eric Stoner mention that a couple of times in the chat that they're going to wind up winning. But is it through the air? Like, are they winning through the air, or are they winning through Javonte Williams, completely just hammering that game home, and and also Melvin Gordon as well? So I'm not sure.
I'd probably go Cousins. And I mean, the reason I'm probably going Cousins because it's Kyler Murray. Cousins is going to have to keep pace with Kyler Murray. And this is why, like, if you're going really deep, like this could be another game where Cousins throws 49 times and KJ Osborne catches 7 or 8 balls again. And extremely deep leagues. By the way, if you have a league where KJ Osborne is in start-sit questions, I commend you. And those are the kind of leagues we love to play in, where you have to go that deep.
He's been a nice reveal too.
Yeah, because it was all over the place. It was a D.D. Westbrook. Was it Chad Beebe? Was it Amir Smith-Marset? Like, who is it going to be as the number 3? It's clearly
we were all wrong.
Yeah. Well, and I think we may have been wrong about this Vikings offense in the sense that it's going to stay the offense it was in the second half of the year, pass-heavy offense, by necessity, not by design. But by design, we'd like to spend as much time with y'all as we can. It's football season. You can feel the football rushing past you.
Yes.
And it's a wonderful sensation. It's a wonderful sensation to share with the football guys audience, with the fantasy football community. It's one of the more positive, supportive communities out there on the internet. It continues to be that because of people like Dr. Gene Bramel, like Chris Allen, like all of you in the chat room, like the world famous. He's not just the Eric Stoner; he's the world famous Eric Stoner. I remember one time I was talking. I'm just going to go because I got a few minutes. I was telling Eric Stoner that we really want him to be the Tony Clifton. Andy Kaufman fan, this is all familiar, Tony Clifton, the character Tony Clifton, because you never knew who was actually Tony Clifton when he would show up, right? It might have been Andy Kaufman. It might have been, I think, what's his name was right, like Bob Zamuda or something like that. Like nobody actually knew who Tony Clifton was, and that we were going to turn Eric Stoner into the Tony Clifton of football, fantasy football. That like nobody was going to be sure whether he actually existed.
Yeah.
And if Eric Stoner showed up, it could have been Matt Waldman, it could have been Mark Schofield, it could be you, it could be me. It could be, Justice. It could have been anybody. Yeah. So it's awesome. We've really pulled him into our fantasy community, and we get a lot out of that. We get a lot out of the time we spend together, folks. So we'll be back every Sunday morning. Cecil and I are going to be doing the recap on Monday morning because he's on assignment. So join us live tomorrow morning for the recap of week 2. In the meantime, get that anticipation on, get this lineup set, clear your mind, get comfortable, get ready for week 2. And as always, stay classy.